Berkeley, California. January 1st, 1958. A man sits alone in his study. The room is quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. In his hand, he holds something small and deadly, a cyanide capsule. It gleams under the dim light like a piece of polished glass. His fingers tremble, but his face shows something unexpected. Peace. This man is Dr. Douglas Kelley, a brilliant psychiatrist who once examined the minds of history's most notorious criminals. 12 years ago, he sat across from the men who orchestrated the Holocaust, men who murdered millions without flinching. He studied them, tested them, tried to understand what made them capable of such unimaginable evil. And now, he's about to die using the exact same method one of those men used to escape justice. How does a psychiatrist, a man trained to heal minds, end up swallowing poison given to him by a Nazi war criminal? And what does this tragedy tell us about the nature of evil itself? The answer is more disturbing than you can imagine, because what Dr. Kelley discovered at Nuremberg wasn't just about Nazis, it was about all of us. To understand this story, we need to go back to where it all began. Not in a courtroom, not in a prison cell, but in the streets of a shattered Germany after World War I. The humiliation of Versailles, June 28, 1919. The Treaty of Versailles was signed, officially ending the First World War. For the Allied powers, Britain, France, and the United States, it was a moment of triumph. For Germany, it was the beginning of a national nightmare. Article 231, known as the War Guilt Clause, forced Germany to accept full responsibility for starting the war. The German people saw this as a profound humiliation. They were told they alone were to blame for the deaths of millions, for the destruction of entire nations. But it wasn't just about blame. Germany was ordered to pay reparations totaling 132 billion gold marks, roughly $442 billion in today's money. The country's military was dismantled. The once mighty German army was reduced to just 100,000 men. Submarines and military aircraft were banned entirely. Germany lost territories, including Alsace-Lorraine, which was returned to France, and all of its overseas colonies. For a nation that had been a dominant European power, this felt like total annihilation. Economic collapse and desperation. By 1923, Germany was in free fall. Hyperinflation destroyed the economy. The German mark, which had been worth 4.2 to the US dollar in 1914, plummeted to 4.2 trillion marks to the dollar by November 1923. Imagine this. Workers were paid twice a day so they could buy food before their wages became worthless. People filled wheelbarrows with cash just to buy a loaf of bread. Life savings evaporated overnight. The middle class, the backbone of German society, was wiped out. This wasn't just economic hardship, it was national trauma. Germans felt betrayed, humiliated, and desperate. They blamed the Treaty of Versailles. They blamed the politicians who signed it. They blamed everyone except themselves. And into this chaos stepped a man with a simple, powerful message. Hitler's first speech. The year was 1922. The place, a small coffee shop in Munich, upstairs in a cramped room with maybe 30 people. A man stood up. He wasn't impressive to look at a failed artist, a mediocre soldier. But when he spoke, something happened. French bellies are being filled with German pain, he said. The room went silent. They make threats, he continued. But if you make threats, you need bayonets to back them up. Among the 30 people in that room was Hermann Göring, a decorated World War I fighter ace. He later recalled that moment to Dr. Kelley. That night, I became a National Socialist. Why? Because Hitler offered something the German people desperately craved. Hope. He promised to restore their dignity, reclaim their former glory, and make them feel German again. The appeal of a failed painter. Let's be clear, Adolf Hitler was not a genius. He was not a brilliant military strategist. He was not even a particularly good speaker in the traditional sense. But he understood something fundamental about human psychology. People in pain will follow anyone who promises to end that pain. Hitler told Germans they weren't to blame for losing the war. They had been stabbed in the back by traitors at home. He told them they weren't inferior, they were part of a master race destined for greatness. He told them they didn't have to accept humiliation, they could fight back and reclaim their pride. And millions of desperate, angry, frightened people believed him. Hermann Göring later explained it to Dr. Kelley this way: "I had seen Germany crushed, and along comes a man who says we can reclaim our former glory. Would you not follow a man like this?" It's a chilling question, because the honest answer for many people in that situation would be yes. Fast forward 23 years. The war is over. Nazi Germany has been defeated. Hitler is dead. And the surviving leaders of the Third Reich are being held in a secret military prison. Nuremberg, 1945. The Palace of Justice in Nuremberg, Germany, was chosen as the site for the most important trial in human history. For the first time ever, an international tribunal representing the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union would put military and political leaders on trial for crimes against humanity. 22 Nazi leaders were held in solitary confinement, awaiting judgment. Among them, Hermann Göring, Hitler's designated successor and the highest-ranking German military officer of all time. Rudolf Hess, Hitler's former deputy. Joachim von Ribbentrop, the foreign minister. Julius Streicher, the virulent anti-Semitic propagandist. But before any trial could begin, someone had to answer a crucial question. Were these men mentally competent to stand trial? Enter Dr. Douglas Kelley. Psychiatrist's mission Dr. Douglas Kelley was 31 years old, a brilliant psychiatrist from California with a reputation for psychological innovation. Central Command believed he was exactly the right man for an unprecedented task: determine whether the most evil men in modern history were sane enough to face justice. Kelley arrived at Nuremberg with a scientific mindset and a clear mission. He would conduct psychiatric evaluations, administer Rorschach inkblot tests, measure intelligence, and build psychological profiles. What he didn't expect was that one prisoner in particular would challenge everything he thought he knew about evil. Meeting Hermann Göring. Hermann Göring was not what Kelley anticipated. When the Americans captured him in May 1945, Göring was obese, addicted to morphine-based painkillers, and barely coherent. He had been taking paracodeine pills by the handful for years, a dependency that had spiraled out of control. But by the time Kelley met him in the fall of 1945, Göring had been detoxified. American doctors had carefully weaned him off the drugs, controlled his diet, and supervised his withdrawal. He lost nearly 80 pounds. The transformation was remarkable. The man who emerged was sharp, witty, charismatic, and dangerous. Each morning, Göring would greet Kelley with a broad smile. He was friendly, cooperative, even charming. He loved to talk about his life, his accomplishments, his friendship with Hitler. Kelley was fascinated. Here was a man who had been at the very center of the Nazi regime, who had helped plan and execute some of the worst atrocities in human history, and he seemed perfectly normal. The dangerous relationship. Over the next 6 months, Kelley and Göring developed what appeared to be a friendly, even warm relationship. Göring asked Kelley to carry messages to his wife. Kelley agreed. Göring shared intimate details about his life, his motivations, his views on Hitler. Kelley listened, recorded of everything, and believed he was gaining unprecedented insight into the Nazi mind. But something else was happening, something Kelley didn't fully recognize. Göring was manipulating him. Every conversation was carefully orchestrated. Göring played on Kelley's empathy, his intellectual curiosity, his desire to understand. He presented himself as a complex, misunderstood figure, a patriot who loved his country, a soldier who followed orders, a man trapped by history. And Kelley, despite all his training, began to see Göring not just as a research subject, but almost as a colleague, someone he could talk to, debate with, even respect on some level. This was exactly what Göring wanted. Kelley's primary tool for understanding the Nazi leaders was the Rorschach test, a series of 10 inkblot images that subjects interpret and describe. The Rorschach ink blots. The Rorschach test was considered cutting-edge psychology in the 1,940 seconds. The idea was simple. Show someone an abstract image and ask them what they see. Their responses would reveal their personality, their mental state, their hidden psychological patterns. Kelley was an expert in administering and interpreting these tests. He believed they could unlock the secrets of the Nazi mind. He tested nearly all 22 defendants, and what he found shocked him. Göring's results. One of the most famous Rorschach cards, card 5, looks like a bat. More than 50% of people identify it as such. When Göring was shown card 5, he said, "A bat." A perfectly normal response. In fact, Göring's entire Rorschach profile showed what Kelley described as normal basic personality. Yes, there were signs of marked egocentricity and powerful emotional drives. But there was nothing pathological, nothing insane, nothing that would explain how this man could have participated in genocide. Kelley also administered IQ tests. Göring scored 138, the third highest among all the Nazi prisoners. When Kelley told him the result, Göring beamed with pride. The disturbing pattern. It wasn't just Göring. Kelley and his colleague, psychologist Gustav Gilbert, tested almost all the defendants. The results were consistent and deeply disturbing, with the exception of Julius Streicher, who showed signs of psychological abnormality. All the Nazi leaders tested within the normal range. These were not madmen. They were not psychopaths in the clinical sense. They were ordinary people with above-average intelligence and no diagnosable mental illness. Kelley's conclusion was as stark as it was terrifying. The Nazi leaders were not special types. Their personality patterns indicate that, while they are psychopathic personalities, they are not unique or insane. We could find them in any country today. The Nuremberg trials officially began on November 20th, 1945. Justice Jackson's Mission American Chief Prosecutor, Robert H. Jackson, had a clear goal: expose the full horror of Nazi crimes to the world and hold the perpetrators accountable. "We will put Hermann Göring on the stand," Jackson declared, "and we will make him tell the world what he did." But Kelley warned him, "I know more about this man than anyone else on the planet. You're walking into a trap." Kelley understood what Jackson didn't. Göring was a master manipulator, a brilliant orator, and someone who thrived in the spotlight. Göring on the stand. When Hermann Göring took the witness stand, he was calm, confident, and defiant. He admitted that he had been Hitler's loyal follower. He admitted that he knew about the atrocities committed by the regime, but he refused to express remorse. "I am a prisoner because you won, and we lost," he told the court, "not because you are morally superior." It was a chilling statement, one that cut to the heart of a fundamental question. Is justice determined by morality or by power? Göring argued that the Allies had committed their own atrocities during the war. The firebombing of Dresden, the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The only difference, he seemed to be saying, is that you won. This argument didn't save him, but it planted seeds of doubt in some minds. The verdict on October 1st, 1946, the verdicts were announced. Hermann Göring was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death by hanging. But Göring had made a promise months earlier. "I will escape the hangman's noose. I am very sure of myself. No man has ever beaten me." And he kept that promise. The final escape, on the night of October 15th, 1946, just hours before his scheduled execution, Hermann Göring bit into a cyanide capsule and died in his cell. To this day, no one knows for certain how he obtained the poison. Some believe it was smuggled in by a sympathetic guard. Others think he had hidden it for months, waiting for the right moment. What we do know is this: Göring denied the Allies the satisfaction of executing him. He controlled his own fate until the very end, and he left behind something else, a cyanide capsule that Dr. Douglas Kelley kept as a grim souvenir. After the trials, Dr. Kelley returned to the United States. He tried to resume his normal life teaching, practicing psychiatry, raising his family, but he couldn't let go of Nuremberg. The book and the warning. In 1947, Kelley published a book, 22 Cells in Nuremberg. In it, he laid out his findings from the psychological evaluations. His central thesis was stark. The Nazi leaders were not monsters. They were ordinary people. The Nazi leaders were no special breed of supermen or devils, Kelley wrote. They were merely products of their time and environment. This conclusion horrified many people. The public wanted to believe that the Holocaust had been orchestrated by madmen, deranged, inhuman creatures who bore no resemblance to ordinary citizens. But Kelley's research suggested something far more disturbing, that normal people, under the right conditions, were capable of unimaginable evil. He gave lectures warning that Nazi-like personalities existed in every country, including the United States. He even proposed that political candidates should undergo psychiatric testing before being allowed to hold office. Some people listened. Most didn't. The dissent. By the mid-1950s, Kelley's life was unraveling. His marriage was failing. He was drinking heavily. He struggled with depression and professional frustration. Friends and colleagues noticed that he often talked about Göring, about their conversations, about the cyanide capsule, about the strange bond they had formed. Some wondered if Göring had gotten into Kelley's head in ways that even the brilliant psychiatrist didn't fully understand. New Year's Day, 1958. On January 1st, 1958, Douglas Kelley sat alone in his study. He had been arguing with his wife. He had been drinking. He was 54 years old and felt like a failure. In his hand, he held one of the cyanide capsules he had taken from Nuremberg, perhaps the Dom, very one that Göring had intended to use. And then, in an act that stunned everyone who knew him, Dr. Douglas Kelley swallowed the poison and died. Douglas Kelley's death raises questions that remain unanswered to this day. Did Göring win? Some believe that Hermann Göring manipulated Kelley so completely that he effectively destroyed him. During their months together at Nuremberg, Göring had planted ideas, shaped perceptions, and blurred moral lines. He had convinced Kelley that the Nazis were not fundamentally different from anyone else, that given the same circumstances, any nation could have done what Germany did. Was this true? Or was it just another of Göring's lies, a final manipulation designed to undermine the moral clarity of the Allied victory? The banality of evil. Years later, political philosopher Hannah Arendt would attend the trial of Adolf Eichmann, another high-ranking Nazi. Arendt expected to see a monster. Instead, she saw a small, pompous, ordinary man who spoke in clichés and seemed incapable of understanding the magnitude of his crimes. She called it the banality of evil, the idea that great atrocities are often committed not by sadistic monsters, but by ordinary people who simply stop thinking, stop questioning, and stop seeing the humanity in others. Kelley's research at Nuremberg reached the same conclusion years earlier. The Nazis weren't aberrations. They were normal people who made terrible choices. This is what makes Kelley's findings so disturbing and so important. The warning. If the Holocaust was perpetrated by ordinary people, then it means that ordinary people are capable of unimaginable cruelty. It means that we cannot simply say, "It could never happen here," or "I would never do such things." It means that under the right conditions, economic collapse, national humiliation, charismatic leadership, propaganda, and fear, any society can descend into barbarism. Kelley spent the last years of his life trying to warn people about this. He tried to tell them that the seeds of fascism exist everywhere, that vigilance is required, that we must never assume we are immune to the forces that consumed Germany. But people didn't want to hear it. They wanted to believe that Nazis were monsters, not men. That the Holocaust was an anomaly, not a warning. And perhaps that's what ultimately broke Douglas Kelley. So here's the question we must ask ourselves, the question that Dr. Kelley struggled with until his final breath. Where does evil come from? Is it born into certain people? Are some individuals simply wired to commit atrocities, while the rest of us are safe from such impulses? Or is evil something that exists within all of us dormant, waiting for the right conditions to awaken? Dr. Kelley's research suggested the latter. The Nazi leaders were psychologically normal. They weren't possessed by demons. They weren't suffering from mental illness. They were ordinary men who made choices terrible, monstrous choices, but choices nonetheless. Hermann Göring understood this. When asked how the Holocaust happened, he gave a chillingly simple answer. People let it happen. Think about that. The Holocaust didn't happen because of a handful of madmen. It happened because millions of ordinary people either participated, looked the other way, or convinced themselves that someone else would stop it. It happened because people prioritized their own safety, their own comfort, their own survival over the lives of their neighbors. It happened because good people did nothing. A final thought, Dr. Douglas Kelley died using the same method as the Nazi war criminal he had studied. Was this coincidence? Or was it symbolic, a final, tragic acknowledgement that he and Göring were not as different as he had once believed? We'll never know, but his death stands as a haunting reminder. When you stare into the abyss, sometimes the abyss stares back. The Nazi leaders were not monsters. They were men, and that is the most terrifying truth of all. So tell us, what do you think? Is evil born or created? Could it happen again? And if you had lived in Germany in the 1930 seconds, what would you have done? Leave your thoughts in the comments, because this conversation, this reckoning with the darkest parts of human nature is one